out and walk up the side here, and you go in to that room. It's called the sacristy. It's a churchy word, but you go into that room and down some stairs and just follow. There's only one way to go, and you'll see where the restroom is. Maybe I'll write it down. It's taking both time. What? We'll all do the first question. And then two, this, oh yeah, I do have this. So Tony and Leor are spending a lot of time on question two.
So if you want, you could skip me for one and I could combine my answers. If I go first with number two, I could answer both.
No, I think it's okay just to say something really briefly, or just say, I'm going to pass it on. But if you want me to skip, actually, just tell me. Two is Tony and Leor, and then three, I have Wael and Leor mostly, but Julia has for number three too. You had something that. Oh no. Skip it for three? Okay.
Skip it for two also.
Number one? Oh, okay, that was, got it. I mean, you have to say something about Jihad, so it really is, so you don't get a hard pass on that one.
Can we say what I'm going to talk about that? I forgot the question number one.
You all can just let me know too. And then question 4, I know that one's dear to Wael's heart and to Tony's heart, right?
Which one? 4?
Number 4. That was, all good if we get started? Good afternoon. Welcome to St. John's. It is such a gift to have you all here, and it's a real gift to have been invited as St. John's to host this. I don't see, there's Joseph. Joseph asked that we host something having to do with peace at the end of Civil War weekend. And so the other people that I'm really grateful for are these folks, who I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I'm so grateful that all of us get to be here in this room together when the world is at war, to be together as real human beings and not on our screens, and to have real conversation. This will be sort of like a panel discussion. We'll pass the mic to people who have questions that they dearly love most, and we'll save time at the end so that you can respond to anything that you've heard or pitch something for the rest of us to think about. So I'm going to let you all, I'm Ruth Ferguson. I'm the rector of the church here, and I've been here for about 1.5 years, and I guess I'll say one more time, thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth, for having us. So my name is Wael Jabr. So I'm faculty at Penn State at the College of Business. Speak up, okay. So I'm faculty at Penn State at the College of Business. I'm originally from Lebanon, and this is useful to know because I grew up in a war zone. So I'll share in a bit some of what that meant to me. I'm also involved in some social work around State College and Central Pennsylvania, and hopefully at some point also I'll get a chance to talk about that. Happy to be here and thankful for Ruth and what she's doing.
I'm Tony White. I'm a Quaker. I'm the clerk of the Peace and Social Concerns Committee at State College Friends Meeting, and I teach philosophy at Penn State. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Thank you for hosting us, Ruth. My name is Leor Sternfeld. I'm a historian here at Penn State. I teach history and Jewish studies, history of the Middle East. I'm historian of Iran, Israel, and Palestine. I'm originally from Israel, and I'm Jewish. I think this is it for now.
Hi, my name is Julia Spiker Kasdorf. I grew up in a Mennonite home. My parents grew up, if you know where Belleville is, it's about 30 miles south of here. My dad was Amish and my mother was a conservative Mennonite. And they moved to southwestern Pennsylvania. And I grew up there in a more progressive Mennonite community. And I went to Mennonite college for several years and then transferred to NYU. And while in New York City, began worshiping with the Episcopalians. So this is my home congregation now. But I will be speaking today as a Mennopalian from the peace tradition that I knew growing up.
So I'm going to say just a little bit to each of these because I'm kind of a mainstream, boring Christian, and we all know what those are like. I want to give more time to our guest panelist, but you have the questions that we're responding to, and if you look at the first one, you'll see the question that we're going to respond to here, and I would just say that Christian nationalism is a form of holy war. It's not a new phenomenon. It is the oldest temptation in the history of my faith, the fusion of the cross with the flag. And I was just told literally before this service that flag and the Pennsylvania flag, those came up after 9/11, the American flag, Pennsylvania, and all the other ones that is a kind of response. And what I would say to what's happening today is that we've been here before. Christian nationalism has lived on in other countries. And I would just briefly say that Jesus he wasn't part of an Occupy movement. He was not, except maybe Occupy Wall Street, or he blesses that, but he wasn't part of an occupation. He spoke to people who were being brutally occupied by the Romans, and they desperately wanted to believe that God was on their side, the people being occupied, but he wouldn't really give them that. When he said things like, love your enemy, he was talking to occupied people about each other, but also the occupiers. And I'm going to pass the mic along.
It's a tough panel to be on because I have a pastor, I have two philosophers, I have a poet, and I'm a business guy. So, so it's difficult to compete, but I'll try. So I guess I didn't mention that I'm Muslim, and so when answering this question about peace and violence, I'll draw a little bit on my faith. Disclaimer here: I'm not a priest. I'm not a preacher. I'm just a guy, a regular guy. So when I thought about the question about in terms of peace and violence, and I tried to think about how Islam thinks of peace and thinks of violence, I realized that there is nothing in Islam that talks about specifically how one has to be peaceful or one has to be violent or otherwise. It talks about justice, and it talks about how we all have to strive for justice. And what that means is if you see something wrong, we are required to do something about it. And Islam says, if you see something wrong, you have to do something, and then it gives guidance on what that means. And it says you have to do something about it, and first do something about it with your hand. That's literally what the statement says, which means some action. And then it says, if you can't, because you're weak or I don't know, oppressed, so you can't do something about it with your hand, then with your tongue. So you have to say something about it. And then it says, if you can't do something about it with your tongue, you have to do something about it with your heart. So at least feel pain inside and say, this is not right. And then it adds that this is the weakest of faith. So doing something about it in your heart is the weakest of faith. And therefore says, you have to do, kind of nudging us to do something about it, at least by saying something about it or doing something about it. Now, some might interpret doing something about it with your hand as violence. I don't think so. I think fighting an oppressor is not violence, is standing up for the weak. And then Islam also talks about how so there is a verb in Quran that talks about, a sentence in Quran that talks about how if you kill one person, it's as if you kill humanity in its entirety. And that's literally what it's written there. So there is this idea that do something about it with your hand, but keep in mind, if you end up killing someone, it's like killing the entirety of humanity. So be careful and think about it before you do so. And Islam is also I think it's a very scripted religion, meaning there's a lot of details on what needs to be done and what not to be done. And same for war, and because I'm not a preacher, I wrote these down. So there is clear guidance on, so Islam talks about how at times of war, it says, do not kill women, children, monks, clergy, elderly civilians, or other non-combatants. Do not mutilate bodies. Do not torture. Do not betray treaties or agreements. Do not destroy crops, animals, homes, or places of worship unnecessarily. Do not punish people collectively for the actions of others. Treat prisoners with dignity and provide food and care. And accept peace when the other side genuinely inclines toward peace. So you might say then, what about jihad? What about how Muslims love to kill themselves and love to die? And I think these are misconceptions. Jihad in Arabic means to struggle, to strive to do something. And so now if you think about jihad in terms of doing something with your hand or with your tongue or with your heart, then that's it. Yeah? And you might also say, what about martyrdom and the idea of how, at least in mainstream thinking, Muslims love to die. And I tell you, no, Muslims don't love to die. But think about what the weak would do. The weak would lose hope in life. Think about what someone who's in Gaza, who's being bombed day in and day out. I don't think they dream of a future. I think they just want to end their life. And so it's not a cult of loving death. It's a cult of people who sometimes feel there is no meaning for tomorrow. And they say, directly or indirectly, they make themselves feel better and say, I'm dying for the sake of something. And eventually I'm going to heaven. And I think this is something Julia and I were at some point talked about it, and how, or was it Habiba probably, how when we think about when people people die and people have no hope, and then they wish death upon themselves, that's of course because people have think there is no future for them. I said I'm not a talker, but it seems I'm talking too much, so I'll stop talking.
I'm going to pass for now. I'd like to answer 1 and 2 together.
There's something very problematic in trying to encapsulate Jewish tradition. Because if we're talking about the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, it has everything. You can find justification for whatever you want to find. You want to launch a global war, you will find a justification there. You want to work for true peace and reconciliation, you will find every justification there as well. And so there is one rule in Judaism that it's called Aseh lecha Rav, make your own rabbi. The structure of the religion is not like the church with the Pope at the top of it, and it's similar in a way to Islam. There is the script and commentary. And in olden days, people would go from rabbi to rabbi, from a wise man to a wise man, and hear what they have to say about the scripture and about the morals, and they choose who they follow. So I also, this is the tradition that I follow, right? I mean, one of the I'll say the most important commandment is to repair the world, tikkun olam. But we don't know what the repaired world looks like. What does it mean? Does it mean that it's a world in which the Jews control the borders of the promised land from the book of Genesis? Or does it look like justice and grace and forgiveness in every community? We know that, so each one said that I'm repairing the world the way that I know. And we can have very different opinions about what it looks like. So in the quest for moral guidance, I tend to look at a couple of, or number of wise rabbis in Jewish history. And we are asked, how do you discern what faith is calling people towards peace and when it's been used to justify violence? And the first example that I want to bring is the rabbi from Kloisenberg, who survived the Holocaust, but his wife and 11 children were murdered. And after the Holocaust, he gave a lesson to his Hasidim, to his followers. And he was asked, he refused to say that the Holocaust was the worst thing that could ever happen. And one of his students asked him, why can't you say that? I mean, you lost your wife and 11 kids. Why can't you say that the Holocaust is the most horrible thing that happened? He said, it could have been worse if we were the murderers. And this is something that I carry with me, the understanding that even when you lost everything, it could still be worse if you were in the position of the oppressor. And another story is, it goes back to the 2nd century BCE. There were two great rabbis, Shammai and Hillel the elders. Hillel, the same Hillel who is the namesake for the Hillel organization. And there was a recent convert to Judaism who came to see them. And he first went to see Shammai and told him, teach me everything I have to know about the Torah, about the Bible. And he said, prepare yourself for a life of learning and being buried in the text and devotion to every letter and every comma and every period in the text. And then he went to see Hillel and asked him, tell me everything I need to know. And he said, everything you need to know is love thy neighbor like thyself. All the rest is commentary. Everything else in the Torah, you should read it as if it was commentary on love thy neighbor like thyself. These are two of my, of my inspirations in Jewish tradition. And I try to read everything from this perspective. Thank you.
So Mennonite tradition is much newer. Mennonites trace their origin to exactly 501 years ago in the city of Zurich, which at that point had become Reformed, so it was Protestant Europe. There were several young theology students who met, and they felt the Protestant Reformation, the Reformed Church in Zurich, had not gone far enough. And so they baptized one another as adults, even though they had been baptized as infants in the official church. So that was the first transgression, was taking that upon themselves to baptize one another. And the other thing they believed in was in a kind of literal following of the teachings of Jesus, including love your neighbor as yourself. And at a time when Switzerland, the nobility in Switzerland were essentially making their wealth through mercenary soldiers, they said, a follower of Jesus does not bear the sword. So they were immediately named Anabaptist, against baptizing, and later called defenseless Christians. And in Switzerland, they were considered enemies of the state, and so hunted and executed. In Catholic Europe, they were considered heretics, and so hunted and tortured and executed. And so that's how Mennonites ended up in America so early, because they were fleeing that kind of treatment. And even now, I think Mennonites take a fairly literal view of the teachings of Jesus and prioritize the Beatitudes. This window here is a Beatitude window. It's one of 8 blessings, and I'm thinking this isn't a Hebrew tradition of blessings, right? Reciting blessings. So I'm going to just say the 8 Beatitudes or the 8 blessings, but these are kind of central in Mennonite belief. The window is, blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
The Civil War was rooted in slavery and a system that treated some human lives as less valuable than others. Where do you see questions of power and equality and whose lives matter shaping conflicts in our world today? And how does your tradition help you confront injustice without losing your commitment to peace? And I would just say that it's in the Christian and Episcopal tradition, that's a spiritual question. It's not a political question. And I did want to say this, that not all Christians might know that violence began to be sanctioned when Emperor Constantine said he had a vision of Jesus crucified in the sky, asking him, Constantine, to conquer in Jesus' name. And those are the dark roots, I believe, of Christian nationalism and terrorism. I just wanted to throw out one more wrinkle because it's kind of fun. We're doing theology a little bit. It's not that clear that Jesus was the pacifist we want him to be. I kind of want him to be, but there's plenty of scholarship about what he might have meant when he said, I didn't come to bring peace to the earth, I came to bring a sword to divide people. And he may well have been a zealot who was part of a revolution, who wanted to protect the temple. So there's a lot that we don't know. And I'm going to pass this on.
Thanks. I don't think I can keep up the same level with everybody here, but so I'm going to kind of combine answers to the first two. The Quakers say that there's an inner light within each person, sometimes called that of God in everyone. And this makes everyone valuable and capable of realizing truth. And I guess because of both of those things, that everyone has an element of the divine, and that we don't have a monopoly on truth, but truth can come from anyone, led to something called the peace testimony that the Quakers are famous for. So although it's more based on inner revelation, I suppose, than the Bible, but very similar conclusion to the Mennonites. They said war was incompatible with the Spirit of Christ. And I have a quote from, what would it be, 1650 approximately, their famous declaration to the king said, "We utterly deny all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons for any end or under any pretense whatsoever, and this is our testimony to the whole world." But where you could go wrong with this is some people get the impression that being for peace means being passive and standing on the sidelines. But the peace testimony is not the only one that the Quakers have. There's also testimonies of equality, community, integrity, and stewardship, and a few more. And if you take the peace to mean being passive, you're really missing the other values as well as the connection between them, because real peace has to involve justice, as Martin Luther King said, not just a absence of tension, but a presence of justice, and not just sweeping conflict under the rug, but sometimes maybe what the division is the initial tension, the division initially, which leads to a greater peace where people actually get along in harmony. And so, the Quakers were also at the forefront of the abolitionist movement, the Underground Railroad. The abolitionists were putting themselves at great risk for equality and for freedom and for justice and what was right. So, looking at this question, I hope we could think of the abolitionists as a good model for, with leadership of the country pushing the us versus them mentality and persecuting people based on race and immigration status and gender identity. We have to recognize that you have to stand with the people that are being oppressed, and do what you can to fight. I mean, I guess. How about this? Why did they even have to say we don't fight with outward weapons? Or why did they even have to say anything to the king? Because everyone knew that they were dissenters, and they were leaving open the door to fighting in other ways, right? So we've got to fight for a society where everybody is loved and respected and included in the peace.
In the Hebrew Bible, the books of the prophets usually tell the story of the king who supposedly, reigns on behalf of God's grace. But then we have the prophets who are the leading of position. Ezekiel, Jeremiah, especially Jeremiah. I remember like when I was a high schooler and in Bible classes, when you read the text that he read with the anger against the king, against the elites, against what we would call today the oligarchy. These are the lessons that I think led many generations of social activists in the Jewish communities. And in the context of wars and conflict, there is one sentence that, one verse that is being said in daily prayers, but also in Passover and many of the high holy days, which is, remember that you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. And this is timeless, right? I mean, for most of history, of recorded history, Jews were not majority in any of their respective communities. This is Jewish sovereignty is a very new phenomenon. But it says that you have to remember that wherever you are in social hierarchies, no matter where you find yourself, you have to remember that you were foreigners in the land of Egypt, that you were the minority, the oppressed minority, and you have to remember the feeling of being down, of being beaten, and do better towards the other. And I think that this is something that explains also the participation of Jews in the civil rights movement that were outnumbered by a lot. And in other places, in social movements in the Arab world, in South Africa, in the US and everywhere, because I think that it comes from this understanding that we ought to remember what it feels like to be at the bottom of the social hierarchy. And we have to know how to elevate everyone, which of course is not a universal lesson that is being equally applied.
One thing I need to say, first of all, is that there are more Mennonites outside of Europe and North America than there are in North America and Europe now in the world. The most typical representative Mennonite is an African woman. So that's important to say, I think. And in this country, there are many Mennonites who do not have European origins. That's just the beginning of the ideas. And those ideas, only 500 years ago, now they're saying, was the beginning of the separation of church and state in Europe, which is important because I'm now reflecting on the 20th century experience of Mennonites in America. World War I, there was no provision for conscientious objectors, whether Quakers or Mennonite. So they took the position of being non-resistant, which meant they would show up at the military training camps but refuse to carry the guns or something like that. World War II, with the help of the Quakers, the historic peace churches managed to get a provision for conscientious objectors in this country. And so that was a different stance. Mennonites came out of the rural communities and worked in hospitals for the mentally ill and other public places. And their presence there ended up changing those institutions. And then, now, I'm going to say, Mennonites have been very involved in the restorative justice movement through their work, initially in mediation and then conflict transformation. So it's gone, people have moved from a position of being more passive to being more active in peacemaking, but always I think there's been this very material, it makes me think of what you said, Wael, about the hands. It's a very material kind of doing. Mennonites don't have a strong tradition in theology. They have a strong tradition in things like there's a mobile meat canner that travels across the United States, and farm communities slaughter animals and they can meat and put it in these cans and send it abroad. So it's that sort of material assistance, or yeah, and I guess I'll stop there. I feel like I'm moving into number 4.
I sometimes wish Episcopalians didn't have such a strong tradition of theology, because we end up being wishy-washy. I mean, that's one of the tenets of our Episcopal faith, is the tradition of being able to reason through things. But at the same time, I don't know, that's why my non-Episcopal friends and non-Christian friends will say, oh, the Episcopal, y'all are the ones who don't know what they believe. Which, I don't know. And as you all were talking, I did want to say this from a Christian point of view, because it's also the point of view of other of the core religious traditions. But in the words of one of my spiritual directors in seminary, she once put it like this: the test of a sound theology or a sound spiritual life is, does it promote well-being for others, or does it limit or harm the well-being of others? And that's fairly simple. And ideally, everybody is welcome at our communion table, but we don't do a good job of that. This is where the people that we follow, the scripture, the leaders that we follow, don't match up to the organized religions that, spring up. Once it becomes an institution, it's hard to hold on to the human part. So the next question is, what has war looked like, not in history or headlines, but in the lives of people you love? And I'm simply going to say that I'm here as a citizen of a country that is bombing the families of other people in this room, and that affects them more than me.
Thank you. So we had talked about how not every one of us should answer all the questions because we won't have time, and that's why I skipped question number 2. But now, allow me, I'm going to answer question number 2. Because I remembered, so I'll just give you a figure about like how Islam treated, I shouldn't say treated, but like just a snapshot of slavery in Islam. So Islam started in Mecca, which is a town, which is a very mercantile town in Arabia, in the center of Arabia. Slavery was there, and there is this famous figure, slave, a black African person who was enslaved and was living there. He was one of the first 5 people who became Muslim, and he was double oppressed because 1, he switched, and 2, he was a slave. And this person, his name is Bilal. So if you want to look that person up. So Bilal was, like I said, one of the first adopters of Islam. And so was extremely tortured to the point where he was about to die, and then wasn't freed, was purchased to get out of slavery. And Bilal's trajectory is so interesting because I think if you think of Islam, probably the one thing that comes to mind is the call for prayer, right? The loud call for prayer in a mosque. And so Bilal became the first person ever to give that call for prayer. And that's, think about the symbolism of you're a nobody, and then you became the person who makes that call for prayer. And he gave the first call of prayer outside Mecca because Muslim had to leave Mecca because of oppression. And then a few years later, they were able to come back. And Bilal was also the first person to give a call for prayer on top of Kaaba. And again, think about the symbolism of what that means. This oppressed person was a nobody, became the person who gave the first azan ever, the first call for prayer, and then the first call of prayer in Mecca where people were oppressed, where he was oppressed and tortured. So now back to the question number 3 about what has war looked like. So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a war zone, and when we were talking about these questions earlier, Leor and I reminded me how we were on the 2 sides of that war. So Lebanon, think of Lebanon as this tiny, thin rectangle on the Mediterranean Sea. Beirut, my hometown, is in the middle of that rectangle on the Mediterranean Sea. We share a border with Israel. So I grew up in a country where almost everyone participated in the war, including Americans, Syrians, Palestinians, Israelis. Lebanon was invaded by Israel a number of times throughout my time. But I wanted to give you 2 snapshots of how life was during these war times. We had many times where fuel was limited. And so any trip by car is something you have to think about. Bread was also rationed. And so many times my dad would be in charge of looking for bread, and so going from one bakery to bakery and to purchase bread, and then doing the rounds around his bigger family, so his mother, his brothers, his sisters, to deliver this bread. Now, this like mundane activity becomes suddenly a life or death activity, because he leaves in the morning and we don't know if he's going to come back, because the bomb can get on top of his car. He might be shot standing in line for bread. So that's one thing that I grew up with, where he leaves in the morning and we're not sure whether he's going to come back in the evening. And the other snapshot is, I think I was 10, 12, I can't remember, years old, and I was asleep. And a bomb fell literally, I don't know, maybe down the street down the street from the church. And I don't know what happened. So I woke up and I wasn't able to speak. And so I would open my mouth and nothing comes out. And now think about what I was going through what my family was going through, and this kept going on for several hours. I'm sure this is in every tradition where we had this cup, this holy cup, with scriptures around it. So my family poured water in it, made me drink many times from that holy cup, in the hope that I speak again. I did speak again. Here I am. I'm speaking. Now I'll fast forward to what has been happening right now, the Gaza stuff, and how this has been on our minds, and Lebanon too. So I'll also give you one snapshot of my life, especially the last several weeks when Israel was bombing Lebanon, was bombing Beirut, and the imagery we were receiving on a constant basis. Waking up becomes a nightmare, where you wake up and you look at your phone and you have these imagery of building after building being flattened overnight. And waking up and hoping that my mother's home is not bombed, because literally they were bombing every single neighborhood in Beirut. No one was safe. And waking up and worrying that my mother or my brother or my sister or their kids is not now part of the statistic. 200 people killed, 350 people killed, 50 children killed, being worried that we're not part of that statistic. I'll leave it there.
So as Wael said, we were experiencing the war from the two sides of the border. And where I come from, the country is responsible for the devastation that Wael described. But when it comes to home front and civilians, the experiences, even though are different, they still, I think it's still something that we have to reckon with. Because if we want to imagine a future in which peace prevails, we have to be attuned to the experiences, to the lived experience of everyone in the region. And I grew up in the 1980s, 1990s in Israel, and this was a period of, those of you who remember the first Intifada and the suicide bombers on buses, and I think that if I have to describe, and I think that it's also something that came from Wael's words, that what controls your life is the uncertainty. Like that you don't know, you wake up in the morning and it's a win, you don't know how you're going to go through the day. You take the bus to school, you know that sometime in the past few weeks, months, the same bus exploded. You go to a mall, it also experienced some kind of explosion. I mean, I think that it's the uncertainty, the fear that controls you, and this fear is used to justify many other atrocities at later times. So, I mean, when we look at it at the root of it, we have to understand the fear and the feeling of uncertainty.
Thank you. You know, mercy is also a rich theme in all of our traditions, and it helps me to remember that people who are spiritual giants in my tradition remind me and us who are Christian that the church can and should be first and foremost a church repentant. Well, we've made it to the end, and then we'll have time for you all to ask things. So this is in one sentence or one long sentence or, what is, am I skipping one? Oh, look, yeah, that's a good one. When the world feels overwhelming, when there's so much suffering, what practice from your tradition helps you stay grounded and not give in to despair or hatred? And I'm going to say, while I have the mic, that Thomas Keating was a Cistercian monk. And following the example of Buddhism and the tradition of the Desert Fathers and Desert Mothers in the Christian tradition, he developed a practice called centering prayer, and it's rooted in ancient practice. But the idea is that you sit in the stillness and the silence of God, that God's first language is silence. And the idea is not to focus on words or feelings so much, but just to surrender to the presence of God and to feel your breath. And in that, you feel the indwelling of God in you, and you feel your connection to all living things. And it's especially the breathing part is very grounding. And the last thing that I would share is on Tuesday nights, every other Tuesday, and you're welcome to join us, we do centering prayer, and then we close with a service of Compline. And in the Episcopal tradition, in our Episcopal prayer book, there are two prayers that I think speak nicely to this question. And one is this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And the other is, "Be present, O merciful God, and protect us through the hours of this night, so that we who are wearied by the changes and chances of this life may rest in your eternal changelessness."
Thank you, Ruth. So I guess the question about what keeps us going and grounded. So I'm going to, for me, Islam is a religion of hope, because it tells us that we are judged on our intentions, not on the outcome of what we produce. And so I guess to tie this together and give you an illustration, so there is a saying from our Prophet Muhammad, saying, if the day of judgment is upon you, and you have a sapling in your hand, plant it. And if you think about it, I mean, it's a day of judgment. Earth is blowing up, the earth is cracking, the sun is exploding. So what's the point? Yet he's saying you have that sapling, and he talked about sapling in the sense, so think of Arabia, palm trees. Palm trees have these smaller palm trees that grow, which depend on the mother palm tree. Yet he's saying plant it. And I guess the point is just hope and do what you can and leave the rest to God.
Well, the Reverend mentioned silence. So the Quakers have a practice of silent worship where we wait and listen within for insight and guidance. And anyone who's moved by the Spirit can speak out of the silence and share a message. And, so this is nourishing, and it might be even more important now with it being so easy to be distracted on your phone and not take time to reflect. I feel like a lot of our recent meetings feel to me like sort of a collective mourning. And then, but we also, give strength to each other with where to go from here.
I feel like I always follow Wael's acts. Yeah. I think that one of the things that helps in the Jewish tradition is that it shows that small acts go long ways, and the personal responsibility. So, for example, there is a verse, one who saved one soul as if saved the entire world. מי שמציל נפש אחת כאילו קיים עולם ומלואו. And it shows that if you can do something now to save one person, you save the entire world, which is something that Wael said earlier in different ways. And also, I try to find a good translation. I'm not sure that it's the best translation. But in Psalms 34, an Israeli musician composed it, and it's a beautiful song, but it says, "Who is the man that desireth life, that loves days, that he may see good therein? Keep thy tongue from evil, and thy lips from speaking guile. Depart from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it." And I think that this helps to keep feet on the ground, focus on what we can do, what one can do, without having too much power, but it as one's responsibility.
I thought at this point we would be getting a little tired of so much talking. So I brought a picture. In 1660, the Mennonites in the Netherlands published a big book of martyr stories. And the Catholics were publishing their martyr stories, the Protestants in England, so, everybody was in the business at that time. And then in about 1680, that book acquired a bunch of illustrations. And most of those illustrations are torture and many different ways of getting killed. But the image that has persisted in the memory of American Mennonites is this one. This took place in the Netherlands, this event, during Philip of Orange. So the Catholics were ruling the Netherlands, and an Anabaptist was in a prison tower. He managed to escape, and he was running across the snow and across a frozen pond, and the jailer was pursuing him, and the jailer broke through the ice. And Dirk Willems, the prisoner, turned around and extended his hand, there's the hand, and pulled the jailer out of the water. And then, of course, the jailer didn't want to, but he was obligated to arrest him. And then Dirk was executed. But the image that we get is not of of burning at the stake, but of the hand extended. And I think that's what keeps me steady. Like, any small way that you can just extend your hand. So I'm going to give this to you.
What a gift. So I have an idea. You see what the last question is. I think we can all say that at the very end, and then Julia has a poem is our closing prayer, and maybe a little bit of silence. But for now, what are y'all thinking? What's on your minds? Is there anything you all wanted to add? And I'll hand the mic off because people will hear you better.
Did you hear the question? Yeah. So politics, my sense of politics, by which you mean like being involved with governments, that really, at least in terms of the US and Canada, that started during the Civil Rights Movement. That prior to that time, at the local level, you know, it wasn't until the 1970s that the Amish could have their own schools. So prior to that, there would be Amish or Mennonite people sitting on local school boards. But in those days, school districts were tiny and local. But it really wasn't until the Civil Rights Movement and after that a lot of Mennonites even voted. There was a sense of, we, as I understand it anyway, and again, when you're a people who don't have creeds and don't have a lot of official statements, what you know is what happens in your congregation, right? But my understanding was, well, we're not voting for people that bear arms like the sheriff or the president of the United States. You know, we'll vote in local elections, and then later, you know, some light was shined on, well, yeah, but if we become involved in politics, we can change things. And so now there are Mennonites who are very sort of activist. There's a website called Menno Action that if you look up, they're very involved in peace issues.
I'll preach, look out.
So I'll save you from the preaching. I'll do my Sorry. So some of us here in the room have been part of a group that's trying to think about what can we do, right? So remember what I said earlier. I said, if you see oppression, you have to do something with your hand, with your tongue, with your heart. And so we're trying to do something, and we're coalescing around a slogan, if you like, and that slogan says, stop the bomb. So join us if you want. I don't think you need a lot of explanation what that means. It means it can mean stop funding these bombs, stop sending these bombs, stop voting for people who manufacture these bombs or want to manufacture these bombs or preach about sending these bombs. And these bombs are not just bombs. They're affecting me. They're affecting Leor. They're affecting everyone else. So join us if you want.
If you need an endorsement from a Jew and Israeli, I'm endorsing.
So the last question, what's one thing you hope that we come away with? And I really would like to invite you all to share just anything. It's okay if it's 2 sentences, because you know, my one thing, my sermon here is just how amazing it is that in a world and with all the governments who would like to see us divided, right here and right now, we're not. We're not. This is real.
So my name is Jackie Bonomo, and I'm co-clerk of the Quaker meeting in State College. This has been really wonderful to listen to. I think we all are here because we care about the humanity and the dignity of each person and the right for every child to grow up and develop that wholeness that's of God or of spirit. And I just want all of us to figure out a way to make that happen. In the world, in our countries, in our churches, in whatever way we can do to act to make that work.
Hi, I'm Janet Irons. I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Center County, but I see myself as being so interfaith that I draw from many, many of the traditions. This has been pretty awesome for me, and I won't say a lot about that, but what I will say is that what I hear is that no matter what your faith tradition, you grasp those parts of it that push you in the direction of doing the right thing. And if your faith tradition is culpable of the kind of injustices that we object to, then you do the work of looking inward and trying to figure out, how that happened and how you move towards repentance. And so for me, the divide is not among any of the people here. It's between those people who are willing to do the work no matter what their tradition is, and those who are not willing to do the work for whatever reason. And I have compassion for everyone, but that kind of inward looking and acting is what inspires me.
I just feel I got stuck with this thing. Thank you, Janet. Just two lines. I'm still struck by the possibility of a complete separation of church and state. If in fact, pre-Constantine, there is no commingling of politics and faith, and if in fact, as the world is burning, you put a sapling in the ground, and if in fact, you save one and you save all, I'm inspired by the possibility of actually separation of church and state, that faith has nothing to do with politics, and politics has nothing to do with faith. And perhaps there's a gear in which that is, a world in which that is feasible. I'll just stick this to somebody else.
Thank you. I just want to thank all of you for giving voice to a broader explanation of each of your religions, because unfortunately I think we get exposed to the loud, extreme voices that are not representative of the faiths, and we get force-fed that through all of our media, and those voices are cherry-picking and hijacking words from each of the works and then using it to justify war and torture and terror. And I just really appreciate all of you countering that and helping with the disinformation that we see every day. It inspires me.
Go down, and then what's one thing you were going, and then do you want to close with a one? It's okay.
Yeah. So I guess the one thing is stop the bomb. Yeah. Stop the bomb. Please stop the bomb.
Since it's Civil War weekend, I'm going to say to think of the abolitionists as a good example. And, look within for what is your moral responsibility, and look out at who is being harmed, and try to stand up for what's right in the most constructive way that you can. And this is the most beautiful event I've ever been a part of. This is amazing.
Stop the bombs and vote out the fascists.
And meantime, nothing is too small to do. that you can do. There are so many ways we can make peace within ourselves or our homes or with our neighbors or amongst ourselves. I'm going to conclude by reading a poem by Mary Oliver, that great beloved American poet who lived from 1935 to 2019. This poem raises the notion of sacrifice, people being willing to die for an idea or an identity, the way war asks soldiers to die, but also asks them to kill, which is another kind of sacrifice. It also alludes to martyrdom. Sunrise. You can die for it, an idea or the world. People have done so brilliantly, letting their small bodies be bound to the stake, creating an unforgettable fury of light. But this morning, climbing the familiar hills in the familiar fabric of dawn, I thought of China and India and Europe. And I thought how the sun blazes for everyone just so joyfully as it rises under the lashes of my own eyes. And I thought, I am so many. What is my name? What is the name of the deep breath I would take over and over for all of us? Call it whatever you want. It is happiness. It is another one of the ways to enter fire.
As if you hadn't had enough good stuff. At 4, there's a film. If you want to come see it, that's great. Let other people know. We're showing a film in the fellowship hall called The Voice of Jabr. And do you want to talk about the film and maybe the Stop the Bomb group? Okay.
So the voice of Rev'd. Rev'd is a tiny little girl from Gaza who was stuck in her car for 12 hours with 6 people in the car killed. So everyone was dead, and she was the only survivor in the car. And so the whole film is the interaction that Hind had with the 911. So she called 911 in the West Bank, so miles and miles away, asking for help. And help was never arriving. It's not a graphic movie. It just talks about the agonizing weight of this little girl stuck in a car with dead bodies around her, probably in their blood. Again, not graphic. And help never came, and Hind eventually died. Again, a glimpse to answer question number 4 was about how does life in a war zone looks like, and that's really what this movie is about. Then what was the other thing? So Ruth is asking me to talk a little bit more about Stop the Bomb. So I think something I didn't mention when I said stop the bomb, it's not just a statement, it's an action. So it's up to us to stop the bomb. It's not just a slogan. So we have to do something to stop the bomb, whatever that thing is. So maybe the slogan should be, we need to stop the bomb. We must stop the bomb, and not just a call in the abyss. And so some of us have put together a statement that we were initially hoping to send to Governor Shapiro, and then another statement just to share with the public about the necessity of working on stopping the bomb. Just so the human aspect of it, and then the cruelty of being part, because each one of us is part of these bombs, and so we have this moral duty of doing something with our hand, with our tongue, with our heart. And again, if you do it with your heart, that's probably the least of faith. But doing something with the hand and with the heart is probably the most meaningful. Do you guys want to say something?
Well, thank you all. We have in our traditions too some way of talking about places that become sacred, thin places, holy ground, and not because this is a church sanctuary, but because of us. I feel like I'm standing in a sacred space, and I hope that you all do too. So have a good afternoon.